So in this video, we're going to bump up our UV editing and mapping skills a bit and work on something more complicated, cylinder shape, in this case a soda can. This is a render that I made after working on it, and this will be our kind of goal or our final result. We're not going to go over every step of the modeling. I'm going to actually leave some of that up to you as a challenge to figure out how to model a cylinder like this with some detail. But I'll show you sort of the steps that I went through to get there, and eventually we'll end up with this render. All right, so let's get started. Let's look at our file. Okay, so oops. I'm gonna hide. All right, so basically what I'm gonna have you working on is let's do it this way so we can look at it. I don't know why. Okay, a little weird. All right, so let's take a look at this. The cylinder that I started with, I'm just going to kind of show you the way this is constructed and look at where the loops are, and then you can kind of work on this on your own. But I'll give you some hints. So I started off with a cylinder that I think had 12, kind of subdivisions around the side. It has a modifier on it. I will turn it off so you can kind of see what it looks like when it's not smooth shaded. Okay, let's look at this. Is probably helpful. So this is basically the model you're looking at. So I made a cylinder, did some extrusions, kind of scaled, made some detailed cuts. It's not super great or super complicated, but it does have some subdivisions. And the important thing for this lesson is figuring out how we would make a UV map of this, and then how I laid out the texture that's in Photoshop that looks like this that I found on the internet. So I already found an unwrapped version of soda can. It's pretty easy to find. It's a basic modeling thing. So take a look at this, pause the video, take your time modeling your own version of this. It is going to need some detail, but it's a pretty basic object if you really think about it. I like to actually grab a real can of soda and look at it and try to challenge myself, see what kind of detail I'd like to get in there. But you want to eventually have it so that when you do smooth shade it, it looks something like this, and then when you add some a subdivision modifier, it gets nice and smooth, and the detail. And the difficult part you're going to find probably is like how to create this kind of somewhat sharp edge, and this one here. And if you look again at the way my model is constructed, you can see how I did that. Right, I used some inset. All right, so that said, let's look at how I did the UV editing. So going to UV editing, and in this case I am going to turn off the soda can, so we're looking from scratch. And what I did is get rid of this view. What I did is create seams, which you can see, and just copy this. So basically I made a seam down the edge, which is going to open up the whole can and be all these faces. And then I did a loop seam around the bottom, so for the metal part, and around the top for the other metal part. So it creates basically these three things. When I did it, I had less subdivisions. I started off with a simpler model, and I did it then, and then I added the subdivisions afterwards. But something like this is what you're going to want to get to. And remember, the steps would be to select the edges, then hit U and mark the seams. And then you're going to select all and hit U again and unwrap it, just like we've done before. So that's the way you'd get the unwrapped surface. So once you have that, you're going to select the whole thing. You're going to go to UV. This is all repeat and review. UV, and export the UV layout, which you'll open up in Photoshop. So we did that in both previous videos, so I'm not going to go over those steps again. I will show you that in Photoshop you're going to have a file that looks like this, and you're basically going to copy and paste it over into your UV layout. So I'll just kind of show you, let's see what's happening here. Yeah, so what the steps look like. So brought the layer over, and it of course doesn't fit. I've got these three pieces. I needed to create separate, these had to be kind of separated, and in Photoshop you're going to need to learn how to select an area and copy and paste it. Very basic Photoshop stuff, but again, not exactly the lesson here. And then what you basically do is one by one, taking the label, you're going to line each thing up with where it should go. So first of all, this layer, the label, is going to be here, so it needs to be rotated and sized in order to fit there. And then you need to identify which part in the model is the top. So if you go back to Blender and you go here and you select this face, well, you know that this is the smaller of the two circles. So back to Photoshop, you know that this is going to be the smaller of the two, so you size it accordingly, and the other one is going to be the bottom, and you size it accordingly. So then at the end, you basically got something that looks like this. You've got all three parts lined up with their correct UV map. And then last thing is, remember that you always want to turn off the layer that's your actual UV overlay map, and then you export this as a JPEG. All right. So once you export this as a JPEG, go back to Blender, you go to your object, which let's shade it and smooth it. Okay, so, and we're going to go into let's go into our rendered view. And I've already done this step, but basically what you do, your materials, again, you create a new material. And right here under base color, you're going to select this little circle, select image texture, and then you're going to go ahead and open up that texture that you saved of the Coke can. And when you do, you will show up and it will be linked properly. So if you go into tab and let's see, we can load this again, you'll see that it's all lined up exactly as it should. It's pretty cool. So then, so basically that is really the gist of it. It's not that complicated of an object to UV map. You've got a seam, but it's nice because the seam is kind of normally already seen on a soda can. And if you go back to your layout mode, go to rendered, And all I did after that, it's very simple, is I rotated one of them on their sides and duplicated that object. That's the nice thing about doing all that work, is then you can duplicate the object. And then in my camera view, I created just a scene where, where's my plane? There we go. What the heck just happened? Okay, try that again, rendered. So I created a plane for these to rest on, and then I also turned on my depth of field on the camera, and that's review. You can go back to the videos that talk about cameras and depth of field. And then I made a render. So this is a good challenge for you to see if you can UV map something like this, but also a little bit of a modeling challenge. See if you can model a fairly realistic Coke can. But the cool thing about this is that once you use photorealistic textures, like actual labels and real photographs onto objects you model, it adds a really great amount of realism, photorealism, and it kind of makes the renders, and they don't take too long to render either. Rendering images does not take long to render. The other thing I should say that I didn't do yet is we didn't really play too much with the quality of the metal of the material. So let's do that. Let's go to this and let's look at, so right now the metallic is set to 0. So if I bring that all the way up, it's going to give it much more of a metallic texture. Let's see, did that change both? Yeah. They both have the same material, so they're both going to change. As far as roughness goes, now a Coke can is not perfectly like mirror texture. It does have some roughness, so I would just experiment with that and give it a little bit of roughness, give it a full metallic quality. That's going to give it some chrome. That's pretty good, something like that. And let's render it. See how that looks. Not too shabby. So that's basically it. Cool, have fun with this one. That looks pretty nice. Even zoomed in. So the quality of this is always going to depend on the quality of your texture. So if you take a really high-res photograph, then you can make this texture even more clear. All right, that's it.